Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cat's Tea in Witchcraft episode 2. I'm a little bit more excited for this episode because the last episode was obviously my first recording and I was a little bit nervous. And today I think will be a longer episode as well because I have more facts, more details, some history, and stuff like that I think you guys will really like. Today's focus is going to be on basic witchcraft history, traditions of witchcraft, and Wicca. There is a little bit of the difference between the two, and then I will get to that later in this episode. I do have a couple PSAs for you guys on things that I might not have touched upon in the first episode. Like I said, I was really nervous, and honestly, I think when I listened back to it, I was talking so flippin' fast. The thing is, I normally do that in my day-to-day life, and people tell me all the time I need to slow down. So hopefully this episode is going to be a little bit more low-key or easy to keep up with. So some of the things I want to let you guys know is that the topics that I go over in this podcast are only really just going to hit the surface level of information. That is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast, is that even though I'm giving you information, it's not all the information that you will need. I want you to use this podcast as a resource to do your own research afterwards. Because if I talk about a topic you might not know about, take the keywords, the thoughts, then the bits and details that I go over and do some more research. Go get some books and do some research on the books that you might think that would go over those topics. In future episodes, I am actually going to give you some book recommendations, but if you would like some sooner than that, feel free to send me a message on one of the social media pages. And also, I am, like I said, gonna give you facts that I have been taught through my mentors and research that I've done on my own. But I'm also going to give you some of my opinions or things that I do differently, or at least things that I have tweaked based on the research that I have done or things that I've been taught by my mentors. When it comes to that, if I ever say anything that sounds really interesting or sounds off, or maybe I misspoke and you know that if it's not one of my opinions and it's actually more a fact-based piece of information, feel free, like I said, also to send me information. And whenever the next episode is, I would greatly like to correct whatever mistakes I might make. I am also learning on my own as well. And like everyone else, the craft is a lifelong journey. We are always going to be learning new things. Even if you feel like you're an advanced level, there's always more that you can learn. Okay, so now that I got some of that out of the way, I'm going to go over some witchcraft history. I'm not going to go over in extensive detail because those details, obviously, you can find online as well if you want to get some more information. But I feel like I'm just going to go over some of the key points in history or some turning points. And you guys have probably already heard of some of these things if you've already done some research in witchcraft. One thing I do want to point out is witchcraft, at least the term of witchcraft, seems to be more European based. So this information that I'm going over is going to be based off of European witchcraft history. The reason I say that is a lot of cultures, if it was in North America, South America, Africa, Asia, or Europe, even though we might picture a lot of the things that we consider witchcraft to be witchcraft, different cultures might not use that term. And the reason for that is different cultures have different beliefs and different words for things, and what we see as witchcraft to them is just part of their culture and their religions. So when it comes to early witchcraft history in Europe, a lot of times when we think of early witchcraft, we kind of go all the way back to the early days of almost prehistory, kind of getting into when civilizations were very, very fresh. Witchcraft can be traced down for probably a couple thousand years, but to be honest, it probably was not seen as magic. It was just seen as the work they were doing with their gods and their surroundings, and everyday life. Since they really didn't have any advanced technology in many of those civilizations, they used nature to guide them. They used the resources they had and the wisdom they learned every day to guide their practices. If it was from deity worship, element worship, or animal worship, they did things obviously a little differently than we did. In some of those communities, and I might be wrong, but a term that you guys might be familiar with is shamans or medicine men or whatever the culture is. There is always people in these ancient societies that were probably more focused on what we consider magic. Just like today, everybody has their job that they need to focus on and what they're the best at. And some of those people were probably better at magic than others. Because when you think about it, it's not really easy without knowing what you're doing. As humans progressed and science became more of a thing, what they thought was magic was probably most likely science and medicine. And because of the lack of understanding of science and medicine, it really did lead to some dark times in history. With the growth and development of monotheistic religions such as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, specifically, while some of those big religions grew and grew over hundreds in the last 1,000 years, it really did change the world and the magic that was being done. As these new large religions were trying to convert people, it really did affect the culture and the knowledge that we have today on old traditions of magic. As people were either being forced to convert or willingly converting to save their families, a lot of information of witchcraft, even if it was verbal, was probably lost. And those who still secretly practiced went underground. Not literally underground, but the practice of witchcraft certainly did. So apparently in 1486 was when the Hammer of Witches, or the Malleus Maleficarum, not sure if I pronounced that right, it is a little bit of a mouthful, was written. This book was written literally to scare people about witches more than they already were and to help hunt them. Even though at this point people were probably already being persecuted and accused of being witches if they were or not, while many of them were not, this book certainly did not help. So many who were being accused of witchcraft were not witches at all. Probably very few of them were, but were honestly probably just blaming neighbors who they had drama with, and they just really wanted them to get in trouble. And some of these people also, if it wasn't just neighborly drama, were midwives, doctors, or people who just really wanted to help their neighbors, but because they worked with herbs or things that seemed a little bit scary and unknown, that would trigger to be called a witch. If you had heard anything about witchcraft, you've probably heard about the Salem witch trials. Apparently, around 150 men and women were put to trial, and around 36 people were actually killed between 1692 and 1693. So now I'm going to jump a little bit more forward in history. Witchcraft laws were not lifted until the 1950s in England and in the 1970s in the United States. Fortunately, we are allowed to practice witchcraft in the United States and at least in England. I don't know about other countries and what the laws are there, but I know in those two countries you could legally practice witchcraft and not be harmed. In the United States, being either neo-pagan, Wiccan, or any sort of those religions, you are protected by United States law. When it comes to that point, I would like to stress that even though we are legally allowed to practice witchcraft and Wicca in the United States, there are some people that don't believe that we have that right. Many people who practice witchcraft are still in the broom closet, which means they don't openly talk about or publicize that they practice magic. Like myself, Only certain friends and maybe a couple family members know that I actively practice. In some situations, if you practice neo-paganism, witchcraft, Wicca, or anything of the above, you might need to keep it to yourself for a while. Not because people will think you're weird, but honestly for your safety. So if you practice witchcraft or neo-paganism and you know that you live in a household that does not support those beliefs, you might need to keep it secret for a little bit longer for your safety. There are ways that you can practice on your own, solitary and quietly. You're just going to have to be a little bit more discreet about it. And in the future, if you want to openly practice, it might be best once you move into your own household and to have your own safety precautions. Your safety is more important than practicing witchcraft. Witchcraft will always be there, but you need to think about what is best for you. Okay, so that's about all I want to go over for witchcraft history. The next topic that I want to go over is traditions of witchcraft and Wicca. So you've probably heard me already say witchcraft and Wicca as if it is two separate things. And it is. Sometimes it's kind of a two-in-one package, but not always. Most Wiccans practice witchcraft, but not all witches are Wiccan. And what I mean by that is Wicca itself is a religion, and witchcraft is a craft. It's the practice of magic. Wicca itself is an earth-based pagan religion that focuses on a god and a goddess. I know that there are a lot of Wiccans that also worship other gods from other pantheons, such as Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Celtic, and Norse. But witchcraft in its own is not a religion. It's a craft. It's the act of doing magic. Some witches do worship gods, but they aren't Wiccan. They can just focus on their own pantheon and do their own thing. There are also witches that don't work with gods at all, such as atheist witches, and that's okay. There is no wrong or right way. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about Wicca because I personally am Wiccan. I'm an eclectic Wiccan, and I do work with the Wiccan god and goddess and another pantheon as well. And I've used this term before, but the worship of multiple gods is paganism or polytheism. That means you worship multiple gods. So before I go on a tangent about something else, some of the popular forms of Wicca is Cabot, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, Celtic, Fairy, Alexandrian, Gardnerian, and Eclectic. I know there are other forms of Wicca out there, but those are some of the main ones that I hear more often, and other ones I just might not know enough about. These different forms of Wicca all have slightly different traditions. The first form of Wicca is Gardnerian, and that was established in England by Gerald Gardner. From there, all the other ones started sprouting up across the world. Some are more strict than others and are really hardcore when it comes to their traditions and how they practice witchcraft, and some of them are a little bit more free-flowing. Besides those couple categories of Wicca, there's also some sub-levels of witchcraft in Wicca. This kind of is a little bit more on the solitary side, which means the practices you just do by yourself or with your family at home, not in a coven. Some covens might kind of work in these ways, but a lot of this is more solitary based. There are kitchen witches, crystal witches, green witches, hereditary witches, cosmic witches, and even Christian witches. I know when you hear that, it does seem a little bit odd, but if that is your path, that is okay. And because it's okay, I do not want to have anyone think that I will ever bash other religions. In no way will you hear me bashing Christianity at all. That is not the right way to go about it. Yes, a lot of people who are Christian do not believe witchcraft is either real or, honestly, they think it is devil worship, which it is not. How can you worship something you don't believe? And from that, if any of my listeners feel like they want to bash another religion or another group of people based on their beliefs, I think you need to rethink some things. So, what are some of these forms of witches? Kitchen witches are witches that mostly work in their kitchen. They work with food, they work with herbs, and probably make a lot of food. One of the cool things about witchcraft is you can put some of your magical energies into the food that you eat. But if you feel like being a kitchen witch is for you, please do your research ahead of time and do not put anything toxic in anything that you, friends or family, or even animals might get a hold of. You should not, in my Wiccan belief, harm anyone. But as you go along your research on witchcraft, not all witches believe that though. Crystal witches are witches that mostly use crystals. Green witches use and have a lot of plants and herbs. Hereditary witches isn't, at least in my mind, not really a form of witchcraft, but more of a lineage of witchcraft. Because when you think of the term hereditary, it means it's been passed down to you. And other people in your family have practiced some form of witchcraft. Besides those few subcategories of witchcraft, there is also hoodoo, shamanism, ceremonial magic, and Santeria. There are other forms of magic in witchcraft that are found around the world, but I won't go over those today. I would like to state, and I'm not sure if I went over this in depth in the first episode, but because I am Wiccan, I am probably going to share a lot of Wiccan beliefs. Even if you decide that Wicca is not the right direction for you and you want to practice another form of witchcraft, that's okay. Even if Wicca is not for you, it is okay to learn about topics and other traditions and styles of witchcraft that you don't agree with. It is really important, just like any other subject matter that you are interested in, it is always good to get information on other points that you might not agree with. Even if you agree with the points, you might not feel like it's just the right path for you. The more information that you gain, it allows you to make your own decisions and form your own path. Everyone's path of being a witch is going to be extremely different. And the only way that's going to happen is through experience, research, and time. One thing that a lot of witches and Wiccans hear all the time is the Wiccan Rede. The Wiccan Rede is kind of like the bylaws of Wicca. It's almost formatted like a poem, but there's one line that everyone who practices modern witchcraft most likely knows. And that is, harm none, do what ye will. What does that mean? That sounds really old. What that means is, whatever you're doing with your magical practice as a Wiccan, any sort of magic that you're doing, as long as it does not harm you or anybody else, do what you want. But like I said before, not everyone is Wiccan, and not everyone follows that rule. So you might come across people who do hexes and jinxes. I, personally, don't do either of those. I also would like to say, if the only reason you are getting involved in witchcraft is to cause harm to others, you might want to reconsider. One of the reasons that I decided to become Wiccan is I do not want to cause harm to anyone. Even if someone has harmed me, I try to take the high road. A second thing that a lot of people hear is also the threefold law. The threefold law is something that Wiccans and some witches practice. And what it means is whatever energy you put out into the universe will come back to you 3 times. Kind of think of it as what goes around comes around, and sometimes people compare it to karma. Not exactly the same though. Like I stated, whatever you put out comes back to you 3 times, positive or negative. Not all people believe that literally though. I sometimes go back and forth if I really believe that if I put really good or really bad energy out into the universe or into my magic, that something bad or good will happen to me 3 times more. I don't necessarily think it's going to be 3 separate instances, but whatever it is will come back 3 times stronger maybe. But everyone kind of has their own opinion about it. Just treat others the way you want to be treated. The golden rule. Okay guys, so that is everything I pretty much wanted to go over today with you. If you feel like there is anything I could have gone more in detail about, or you want to know more about, feel free to message me on the podcast social media pages. So since this was just a bare bones background to witchcraft, you might want a little bit more details and research to find on your own. I always encourage everyone to either go find some books or go on the internet, watch YouTube, and maybe find some other podcasts and people as well, such as people on blogs. There are a ton of witchcraft blogs out there, and I have a feeling that everyone will find their favorite. If I were to recommend 2 books for you today, these are the books that I would recommend looking into. The first one is Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, and it is just a really big blue book. It literally is. It's huge. It's the height of a textbook, but definitely not as thick. And honestly, I think it's more of a workbook because there are pages that almost seem like they're there to help guide you, and you can maybe actually answer some questions, which is kind of helpful. And the other book I would like to recommend today is The Inner Temple of Witchcraft: Magic, Meditation, and Psychic Development. And that book is by Christopher Penczak. This book is a little bit smaller than the big blue book, but it also has tips, some assignments for you, and it's just a really easy read. I really love this book. I have not read it cover to cover, but on the subject matters that I might not already really be informed about, this book is amazing. Those writers also have additional books out there, so also look into them as well. If some of these books might be a little too expensive or not in your budget currently, that's okay. You can totally go for pre-owned books or even possibly try to find them in some used bookstores. I have found so many great books on magic and witchcraft in used bookstores. Sometimes they're annotated and have notes in them already, which helps so much sometimes. Kind of like when you get a college textbook that has notes in it already. Just like kind of like your own Half-Blood Prince. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. If you guys would like to continue to listen to this podcast, I am going to make an episode hopefully either on a bi-weekly or weekly basis. Feel free to follow the podcast social media pages on Instagram at CatsTeaAndWitchcraft, on Twitter at CatsTeaAndWitch, and you can also find us on YouTube at CatsTeaAndWitchcraft Podcast. There is also a website, and you can find that in the podcast description. Just as a heads up, I am planning on episode 3 being how to get started. So it's going to go over a little bit of details on how to maybe start your path or where to go from here. And like I said, thank you for listening today, and I will talk to you guys soon. Blessed be.